Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the radio program this morning is Everything Co-op. And we have Mr. David Thompson from hot and warm California on the line with us. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Vernon. How are you today?
I am great, and you?
Well, fine, thank you.
Well, thanks for getting up so early. I know it's 7:30 out there. And being
it is indeed.
Well, you know, this is Black History Month, and you are one of the people we like to talk to on Black History Month because of your research and your study, both with co-ops and with the civil rights movement. So this year, the focus is on voting. So I've always been curious to see if you have any thoughts on this, is why is it that people in power don't want people that don't have power to vote?
And that's the question you're asking me.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's an important question, and without a doubt, in the United States in particular, there are some of the most atrocious acts of voter suppression that goes on. And the powerful, to a great extent, have very little interest and very little to gain from the electorate wishing to choose its own government. So we have a low voter turnout. We have huge amounts of voter suppression. We don't have, in most cases, same-day voter registration. There are, lots of different things that go on, but people without power, poor people, racial minorities, quite more frequently than others, are not encouraged to vote and are in a way discouraged from voting. Mm-hmm. So the benefit of that is that the rich and powerful get to have a stronger voice because the voiceless and the powerless are not at the table.
So the rich and powerful have a stronger voice.
They do. Mm-hmm. Well, it is out of proportion to the millions of people in this country that either choose not to vote or are discouraged from voting or are discouraged from feeling that their vote has value.
So when I hear a particularly younger black person say, my vote doesn't count, so I'm not voting, I too often think that if your vote didn't count, the man in power wouldn't fight so hard to make sure you can't vote. The vote has a lot of power, a lot of potential, gives people a say in this democracy. And people fight too hard. They purge lists and they do all kinds of things so that blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans can't vote. And they used to didn't want women to vote.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. And I think that's what they still want. They're kind of like, we'll let women vote, but the rest of y'all, no, let's purge these lists. Let's do these things. Let's make it hard for people to vote. And if it's hard for people to vote, then they won't vote. And then we can do what we want, however we want. Okay, the rich and powerful have a stronger voice. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Well, I was contemplating on the fact that Frederick Douglass, when he went to England in 1845 and 1847, he was not safe for him to be in the United States, was very fascinated by the liberals in England who at that time were collecting money, buying land, and then parceling the land out into small parcels that were large enough to give the individuals the right to vote, because in those days, only males who owned a certain level of property could vote. And there were numerous cooperative colonies created throughout Britain where the liberals would buy up that property and then parcel it out to individuals. And many of those individuals were the creators of the first cooperative in Rochdale, England. But that was the way that they were able to get the vote, and that was the way they were able to get land enough of value to be able to, to get that vote. So Frederick Douglass was quite interested in that program and went to visit one of the colonies that had been created in Buckinghamshire for him to see that ordinary people were getting the vote through this ownership of land, divided up cooperatively.
Wow. So I guess he got a real good lesson on what people will do to be able to vote. They had to buy land and then parcel it out. You had to have so many, hectares, acres, or so many square feet of land in order to be able to vote.
Correct.
So that's a real good example of the rich having control, because normally the rich are the only ones that have land. They're landowners. And the poor, the peasants, didn't have land.
Right.
So the peasant's voice was not heard. It was just not at the table.
No.
So you did things, maybe taxation. Would you put taxes in that tax the poor and not tax the rich so much? Maybe. That's what these landowners would do.
Well, there was the poll tax, right? So
what was the poll tax?
That was a tax on poor people if they wanted to vote.
Oh, so going to the polls. So in order to go to the polls, you could pay your way to vote. Mm-hmm. Okay, so somehow you'd have to get enough money to own land or pay in order to vote.
Right.
They made it difficult, didn't they?
Right.
So Frederick Douglass went over there as a slave. He worked and he got donations and he bought his freedom and came back a freedman. Tell me, what do you think was the earliest known attempt by the cooperatives to register African Americans to have a right to vote?
Well, I think from what I know and from the research that I've done, a very unique experiment occurred on St. John's Island, which is in South Carolina. It is a few miles away from Charleston, and at the time there was no bridge between John's Island and Charleston, and so only the ferry that was there. But a young man called Esau Jenkins owned a little bus, and he used to take people from black people from St. John's Island into Charleston across on the ferry for them to go to work each day, and then would pick them up in the evening and bring them back home. He, along with a group of others, formed a cooperative on St. John's Island called the Progressive Club. And the Progressive Club had a store. It was a cooperative store where they bought all of the things that they could from. And in the back of the store was a meeting room. And in that meeting room, Jenkins and others created a classroom to teach black residents of South Carolina how to take the test to be able to get the vote. The test was very difficult, and the local commissioners would make it really, really hard for blacks to even dare go through the door and try to get the vote. because they would be tricked into various questions and answers that they would not know the answer to. And in this classroom at the back of the co-op store, Esau and others taught people what the questions were and what the answers were. He also did it on his bus. And so going in and out every day on the bus, he would teach blacks who, for the most part, didn't read or write in many cases, how to take the test and teach them how to read and write, specifically, how to answer the test. So that was, to me, the first time that a cooperative was playing a role in introducing voter registration and the impact that it would have to the people living on St. John's Island. At one point, Esau and Septima Clark, who was one of the teachers at the class, were asked to go to the Highlander Center up in Tennessee and give a talk there on what they were doing and how they were doing it, because the Highlander Center wanted very much for this program to go throughout the South. And one of the attendees at one of those workshops was Rosa Parks from Birmingham, Alabama. So she and Septima Clark became close friends for the rest of their life. They became engaged highly in civil rights acts and voter registration and numerous things like that. But I think it rather lovely in a way that this tiny little co-op on this small island off the coast of South Carolina was where voter registration classes took their first form, and then ended up registering about 1 million voters in the South through using that same kind of program.
That's fantastic, and we're going to take our first break. But so what I got is the rich and the powerful don't want other people, the non-rich, to vote because it gives them a stronger voice. And that makes all the sense in the world. And they make it hard. In England, Frederick Douglass found out that they made it hard by saying you have to own land or you have to pay money in order to vote. In order to go to the poll, to vote, you have to pay money, poll tax. And in the U.S., in the South, they said you have to pass a test. And it made it very, very difficult for you to pass that test. We'll be right back. And we want to talk some more about this voting and African Americans in the civil rights movement as it particularly relates to co-op. We'll be right back. Information is power. That's why WOL is a great partner for this program. We're trying to give you information about co-ops and how they function, how they work, which would cause you to go out and use it. Start your own co-op or go find a co-op to do business with. That's where the power comes. The power comes with putting the information to action. And Mr. David Thompson is our guest today, basically talking about voting and voting rights and how people, normally the rich people, want to make it so that the poor, the impoverished, those groups of people, that they're afraid that if the poor and the impoverished had a say and voted, then they would vote people in that would do things that's good for them. And when they don't have a chance to vote, then the people that vote would vote people in that would do things that are good for them. So if the rich want to have a bigger voice, they just make sure that nobody else can vote, then they vote for the people they want, and those people then would create policies that are good for the rich and could be harmful for the masses of people. So, David Thompson, we're talking about South Carolina. About what is the timing in this? What year are you talking about with Septima Clark and Esau Jenkins?
These were the late 1950s.
Okay.
When that was happening. In fact, one of the requirements of being a member of the Progressive Club Cooperative was that you had to, as part of being a member of the cooperative, you had to go out and urge other blacks on the island to take the voter registration classes and help them pass that so that they increase the number of people who were able to vote on St. John's Island, which was at the time a black majority population, but ruled by white farmers.
Oh, so the majority of the people on the island were black, but the farmers, the white farmers, made up the rules. They decided who they want to get elected, and then those elected officials would create policies, laws that were good for the farmers and maybe not good for the majority of the people, which were black.
Mm-hmm.
I really want people out there to get, particularly young folks, that the rich and they don't want you to vote. So when you give up and say, my vote don't count, or something like that, that's exactly what they want. And they go through all of these lengths to make sure you don't go vote. So what I like about this cooperative model is that the first principle is voluntary and open membership. So it doesn't make any difference what your race or religion or political suasion is. It's open if it's a true cooperative. And the second one is democratic member control. So it's in the DNA, it's in the structure of a co-op to have one member, one vote. So this stuff is in there. And so when you start looking at what's in the co-op, it's one member, one vote, and the members get that, and they want that to be the same as when they go out in the community. That each person.
And the distinction, as you know, Vernon, is that in consumer cooperatives and housing cooperatives and credit unions, your vote is based upon you being a member as one single human being. Mm-hmm. In all of the consumer cooperatives and the credit unions, the vote is not related to how much money you have, how many shares you have, how big your unit is, those things. So it takes the money element out of the vote element by giving it to each single human being and not being based on the economics of who you are and what you have. So it's really one of the great democratic organizations in the world because it takes wealth out of the equation.
So this is a co-op. It takes wealth out of the equation. I like one member, one vote. So let me quickly tell people out there the four types of co-ops, because you mentioned one and it's consumer. But if a co-op is owned and controlled by the people that work in a business, the employees, then it's called a worker cooperative. So any business you can think of could be owned by the workers. If it's owned and controlled by the people that uses the products or service, is called a consumer co-op. And you mentioned two, and that is housing co-ops and credit unions. REI is another consumer cooperative. And then you have, and farmers use this a lot, purchasing co-ops. So a group of farmers get together and they create a business and they hire staff that learn about what's the best seed and what's the best fertilizer and what's the best. And they learn this and they negotiate contracts and so forth with vendors for the farmers. And the farmers couldn't do that by themselves. And that's called a purchasing co-op. In the district, there's something called CPA, which is a Consumer Purchasing Alliance that was formed to help churches and other nonprofits buy. And they were able to help particular churches save a lot of money. And then on the other side of the farm, you have a marketing co-op, and some call them producer co-ops. So that the farmers, the cattle farms and milk farming, they all They form a company again, and they all give their milk or sell their milk to this company, and they produce the milk or the cheese or butter or whatever they're going to make with this, and they can get it to different markets that the farmer could not get it to. So in all of these, there's one member, one vote. David, I've just gotten knowledge of a entertainment co-op that, I didn't just hear about it, but it's always refreshing to me that these entertainers got together and they formed a co-op. And if one had a gig this week and the other one may not, he would put his money into the pot. And he may not have a gig next week, but the other one would, and he put the money in the pot. And they sort of flattened out that everybody had money all the time. So it wasn't this feast or famine, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of an interesting way of using the co-ops, because everybody can't be Michael Jackson or Prince in order to get all of his money coming in. So it's just a nice way using the co-op model to help out. Okay, so we got the four types of co-ops. We've got all of these principles. Now we hit the fifth principle, and that is education, training, and information. And that's what they were doing at the co-op store in the back room and on the bus, educating and training and giving people the information so they could pass this test so they could vote. It's huge. I find it phenomenally huge that people would go and do all of this work to be able to vote. And then I have people, not every day, but a lot of days saying, oh, my vote don't count. Oh, my vote don't count. And that's sickening. So what can we do? Got any ideas?
Well, I think that the model of the Highlander Center should not be forgotten because in many ways that was the core organization that was distributing the ideas about how to do voter registration. And different groups would come to the Highlander Center, community groups, groups like the NAACP, unions, all sorts of organizations would come to learn how do we get the vote, because if we have the vote much more representative of the communities in which we live, then we're going to likely have better decisions made about the resources that are needed and where those resources should be spread. So at the moment, voter registration ought to be uppermost in the minds of a lot of organizations, because we have too many people whose needs are really quite major in our society, who do not believe that voting makes much of a difference. And we know that it does, but we do need organizations to go out there and to go amongst the poor in particular and racial minorities in particular, and teach them how important the vote is, how powerful an element it can be, and how different a nation we might have if more people who are poor and more racial minorities participated in the exercise of voting.
David, we have to take our second break, and we'll be right back. I totally enjoyed talking to you. The time goes by very, very quickly, but particularly to talk about how to get voter registration going and get other organizations to do that. But we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. David Thompson is our guest today, and we're talking about the role that cooperatives played in helping African Americans exercise their right to vote. And that is a strong, sort of like getting co-ops, this almost not known business entity, to take a major role in getting African Americans to go out and vote. Well, David, do you know of any other besides the Highlander School and the school in St. John's Island that help minorities to get to vote?
Well, what I think about is Septima Clark and Esau Jenkins, took that idea to the Highlander Center. And the Highlander Center was a kind of an organizing hub for the South, and did a lot of transfers of information. But the Highlander Center itself was a kind of a cooperative. All of the people who were members had one vote in appointing the board of directors and, setting the policies for the organization. So the Highlander Center should indeed be looked at as we look at voter registration and look at the impact that the Highlander Center had. But, Martin Luther King ended up going there for classes, Rosa Parks, Andrew Young, almost, John Lewis, almost everybody that we know who became a leader in the civil rights movement spent time at the Highlander Center and took these classes on voter registration and learned how to spread that. And one of I think it was the Marshall Field Foundation out of Chicago, gave money to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference for them to take that program that had started in that co-op and take it to every place in the South that they could to extend the information and knowledge that was needed for people to be able to pass the different registration tests that each state had. And as I said earlier, I believe around about 1 million blacks were registered in the South as a result of that. And it was, one of the elements of bringing power, bringing economic and electoral power to people who had never been able to taste any little bit of that, because the basic element was that they were not encouraged to vote and couldn't vote, and it was made difficult for them to vote. So that power did begin to change the South and change the nature of it. But, the rich and powerful spend a part of every day trying to figure out how to discourage people from voting. So it's an ongoing problem. And, we have a very low voting rate in the United States as a result of how effective it has been. And the start in that little cooperative was a critical feature in changing the attitudes towards the vote. But we are up against it again, and need to repeat some of those programs. And I think, if dollars are to be given to any of these things, I think the best dollar spent will be in voter registration programs throughout the poor communities throughout the United States, so that people can have some ability to impact the outcome.
Other than purging rolls, what are other ways that the people in power make it hard for African Americans and others to vote?
Well, voter registration itself, the IDs that are now required of people to be able to show that, they were born in the country, that they are a citizen in one way or the other. One has to remember that poor folks don't mainly have cars and have difficulty getting transportation. So, getting to the voter registrar to be able to apply for, the permit to vote, to be able to provide all of the information that's needed to be able to get the vote. That is, that's a lot of work for a lot of people, especially older people. A lot of travel that they have to do. There's more difficulty put in the way of many people being able to vote than there is going to the grocery store and using your credit card to buy groceries. You do it right on the spot, as you might say. So, but getting the vote, is a hard process and takes a lot out of people, and many people give up. And then, of course, you have the long lines of voters, arriving at the polls. Why does it take so long? Why do we have voting on a Tuesday, which is a work day? Why can't it be on a Saturday or a Sunday when more people are off and have the time to be able to do that? Why don't we have same-day registration? Why do you have to do these things, let's say, 2 months or 3 months before? It is on people's minds that, if they want to vote in November, they have to register in, July or August. All of these things are, a real deterrent to people being able to have the vote. It should not be so difficult.
I have it that if you're born in America, you go vote. Take your whatever you need. Take your birth certificate. Take your Social Security card. But you're American, and there's always going to be somebody that says you weren't born here. You were born in Kenya or somewhere else. But hey, that's what people say. I don't. All right, I get frustrated. I'm sitting here listening to you and going, how could we get this Highlander Center? What has that closed down?
No, it's still very much in operation. It's board of directors take on different tasks. I think at the moment, one of the main things that the Highlander Center is doing is working with communities in the South, particularly in the coal mining areas, to help them to clean up the streams and the water supply, because there's a lot of poisoning activities that are going on in many of those coal communities and industrial communities in the South. And so they're working with a lot of community organizations to teach them how to organize to be able to, take political action and to clean up the communities in which they live.
Well, I grew up in West Virginia, so that's definitely cold country. But I'm thinking of Duke Energy in North Carolina, where they're using the coal, and then the soot from the coal, that which is left after you burn the coal, is what's poisoning the streams. So it may not be a coal community; it may be the use of coal is what is messing up the streams. And they seem they put these plants in poor communities. Yeah. So.
In fact, sort of an interesting little tidbit about the Highlander Center is that the song "We Shall Overcome," they actually hold the copyright on, because it was a hymn brought to the Highlander Center by blacks from South Carolina in particular. And the hymn was worked on a lot, in particular by Pete Seeger, to bring new words and new meaning to it all. And Pete Seeger and the others passed over the copyright to the song to the Highlander Center. And every year they have a competition, and people who are doing wonderful things in their communities are asked to apply for funds, and the income that they get from the royalties for "We Shall Overcome" fund a lot of community action throughout the South.
So from previous conversations with you, I get the Highlander Center is not in Tennessee anymore. Where is it?
No, it's in Tennessee.
We threatened to go down there sometime, but we haven't done it.
Well, it moved. So where historically we think it is, which I think was Newmarket in Tennessee, it has now moved, and I don't know what the town is now, but it's still in very much based in rural Tennessee.
Okay, I'd like to go visit it.
Yeah, I would too.
Okay, I may not have to wait on you anymore. I think I may have to go, but we figure out. I am real, particularly with this voting thing that's going on now, and seeing what they are doing, and then how to support them anyway to get the vote out.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. And now after this broadcast, I'll go online and take a look and see what kind of focus the Highlander Center has.
In my home, when growing up, there were 10 people in a 3-bedroom house, and David, the house was the top floor. It was a square, and if you just take 2 lines and right down the middle of the squares, there was no hallway, but that broke up to 4 rooms. So one was the living room, then there were 3 bedrooms. Mm-hmm. At one point, the 6 children, the 3 boys and the 3 girls, was in the same bedroom when we were much younger. And boys in one bed, girls in another bed. My father and mother was in another bedroom, and my grandfather and grandmother were in another bedroom. Eventually, my grandfather and grandmother moved out back. So the girls had their room, the boys had their room, and my parents had a room. But when you came time to voting, it was kind of like celebration. It was active and movement. Everybody went to vote. It was amazing looking back on that. My grandfather, grandmother, mom and dad, the neighbors, everybody's going to vote. And I don't get that same sense. Maybe it is in some neighborhoods. But I got that very, very early on. Matter of fact, my whole life, it was with them. It's time to go vote. I don't care what else was going on. So what was your experience growing up with voting? And we got another minute before we take our next break.
Yeah. Well, I of course, grew up in England, and I was aware of the vote very, very early on. Kind of a simple little thing, but as an Englishman, I'm a soccer fan just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. But one of the great soccer players in England played for the team in my town, and he was running to be on the council for the town. His name was Stanley Mortensen. And
hold that. Hold that. We'll be right back. I want to hear what this soccer team guy did. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. The program is Everything Co-op, brought to you by the National Cooperative Bank, whose mission is to work with communities, cooperative communities and their members, and providing great financial services to these communities, especially low-income communities. And that's what we're talking about, low-income communities, and getting the vote out, and how co-ops have helped these low-income communities get the vote out, get the training that they need, get the knowledge to know why their vote is important. And David, you were talking about before we took break, your experience with your soccer team. This great soccer player is now running for city council.
Right.
Okay.
And I don't know, I'd probably be 12 or 13, something like that. So he came knocking on the door of my auntie. I think she was probably sort of doing childcare for me or something after school, and wanted to find out, if she would vote for him. So that was my first kind of knock on the door part of learning about the vote. But you have reminded me that The more peculiar component of that is I was at my Auntie Frances's when another knock on the door came, and this time it was the Conservative member of Parliament who was wanting to be re-elected, and he invited my Auntie Frances to bring me and to go into his Rolls Royce, and he would drive her to the polls. And, this was a street of like 50 houses all next to each other, all adjoining, a working class terrace as it was. And that was my first ride in a Rolls Royce. And, you can imagine what kind of an impact, sort of wealth, has upon somebody when they're going to do their vote, So I'm sure my Auntie Frances voted for him because she got this ride in the Rolls Royce, but it wasn't a vote in her best interest. But for that day, it was a lovely day,
Well, you bring up a whole nother subject matter, and that is, and I really think about West Virginians, that why people will vote for people that they know or they ought to know that are not going to do what's best for them. Matter of fact, they do what's worse for them. And sometimes it looks like there may be one thing that they have in common. The person might say, well, I'm going to make sure that that women cannot have an abortion. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the Bible Belt people say, yeah, and they go vote for him. But all of the economics, the jail sentencings, because you have the opioid kinds of problems in West Virginia, they'd be against all of that. And so it's like when you look at the whole picture, they're voting for people that are not going to do what's best for them. And I can't get that. Maybe it's a ride in a Rolls Royce, which I doubt down there. Okay. But somehow people will vote, even the ones that can vote and do vote, and choose somebody that's going to put in policies and laws that are detrimental to them. I've puzzled that one a lot. I don't get that one.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot went on in the 1960s, and a lot of progress was made. A lot of harm and hurt were done to those who were doing their best to give people political and economic power. Those were times that are treasured, and as time goes by, people don't have that same encouragement. But we forget that the vote is a critical element for designing our society and creating a vision of what ought to be. And when we don't vote or choose not to vote or don't think it makes a difference, it really, really does. And listeners to the program should indeed be going, home tonight and making sure that, the family are voting, the people you work with are voting, the people you go to church with are voting. It's a critical time for the country, for democracy to make its voice heard and for everybody to play a role.
Well, all right. So what I did while you were talking was I looked up Highlander School. It was called Highlander Folk School.
Yeah.
And it's now called the Highlander Research and Education Center.
Uh-huh.
In Newmarket, Tennessee.
Oh, it is in Newmarket, Tennessee. Okay.
Yeah. 1959 Highlander Way. So I am going to look at going down there pretty soon.
Okay.
See how I might get involved to get the vote out, to get people trained. We got 8 months before the election.
Right. Yeah, but only X number of months to voter registration, which allows you to vote in November.
Yeah, if it turns out to be July, you have to register in July. Then you only have February, March, April, May, June, July, 6 months. if that's the case. So it's finding out
Right.
in where you live, what is the registration piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody out there need to check to see if you're registered. Just because you were registered last year doesn't mean you're registered this year, with the way they've been doing the purging and stuff. So you
Right.
need to check now to make sure you're registered. And if you're not registered, then do what you need to do to get registered. And then vote.
Yeah.
Make sure you vote.
Right.
Okay, David, what else would you like to tell folks? Now, it looks like both of us are suffering from a cold. I've been coughing and you've been coughing.
Yeah. It's not so much a cold; it's the early morning air.
Oh, that's okay. Well, mine is a cold. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, all is well.
So, any other ideas on what we could do to get people to get out and vote?
Well, I mean, there are lots of potentials, but I think without a doubt, because of the efforts that numerous states are putting into voter suppression, opposing voter suppression whenever we possibly can, and encouraging voter registration drives, those are the two critical features. Probably very little else counts as much as they do at this particular time.
So it seems like getting organizations, because it'd be hard for an individual to do it, but how can you get churches, as an example, to do voter registration drives?
Yeah, and I think also the immigration groups and Hispanic groups in particular have quite an opportunity to the number of Hispanics who are registered and don't vote is very high, and so a lot of groups are beginning to pay attention to the fact that we could increase voter turnout quite strongly if we got people who were registered to actually vote.
What about getting credit unions to put something in those sheets of paper that says, go vote, make sure you're registered?
Well, that could be done. Each credit union, could take that kind of an action, and I think that all organizations should, put much more effort into getting people to register to vote and to vote when the time comes. I mean, it's if we want to have a democratic society, we need to encourage people to do that voting, and that will be done by groups that people belong to will be much more forceful and have much more impact if they turn around and ask their members and churchgoers to register to vote and to vote.
Yep. So we could, in looking at the co-op world, we could look at credit unions that have got millions and millions of people, housing co-ops, all of these consumer co-ops that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
To get out.
All of them should.
All right, David, 1 minute, last minute. What would you like to leave people with? I don't know. Get out and vote. Please
vote. In the minute that you have, I was asked by the Black Consumers Union in South Africa to go there to help them start cooperatives, which they were not legally allowed to do. And it was unique being in a nation where blacks, because of the color of their skin, were not allowed to vote. I mean, I went there in the apartheid era. And
David, we got to cut it. I'm sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much, man. Thanks a lot.